Greetings, greetings. This is video number 3 for Kinesiology 236, Chapter 11, Muscles of the Trunk and Spinal Column. Where I left off was this and talking about diaphragmatic breathing. And the diaphragm itself, like a muscle, any other muscle in the body, when it contracts, it shortens. So when it contracts and flattens, and it increases the volume in the thoracic region. So if we let this play out, I try to do a little representation for you. The yellow thing is actually a pump that you use to pump up a BOSU or physio ball, and the bag here are the lungs. So as a diaphragm, the pump itself collapses down and contracts, it allows more space for the lungs to fill with air. So push down, they fill with air, push down, they fill with air, push down, they fill with air. So notice how as this contracts and gets shorter, like any muscle does when it contracts, it allows more room for the lungs. And what actually happens there is it's not only allowing room for the lungs, but it allows for a pressure gradient for air to come into the lungs. And then when the diaphragm relaxes, it's helping exhale the air. And you have other muscles that are involved in that process, but at its most fundamental level concerning the diaphragm, every time it contracts, it flattens, and when it flattens, it allows an increase of volume in the thoracic region and allows air to come in the lungs. So it's not as though the diaphragm contracts and squishes air out of the lungs. It actually relaxes and air comes out of the lungs. So exhalation on relaxation. And that would be a hell of a test question too. Switch on up. They do note some of the other muscles of the thorax, and I thought these are pretty good. Just keep in mind the biggies are going to be like the intercostals. With the erector spinae muscles, I brought this up earlier, and with that you notice you have several different erector spinae groups, and notice how they attach differently in the back, and they come up and they attach in different regions to allow different types of movement in the back. Here we are. This is our guy, quadratus laborum. Notice where he starts, where he originates, and where he attaches. Overlay that with psoas and iliopsoas. You can kind of see, wow, look, these guys end up being overtrained. They can really cause some problems in the low back. And now think of your coffee mug stacked one on top of the other with the doggy chew toy in there, the disc, and how they can get squished when that spine is articulated because of QL and psoas and iliopsoas. I left this up here. This is quite good in terms of rectus abdominis, internal and external oblique. You'll be asked questions regarding this all the time. So RA, so muscles up front. External oblique is not represented up top here very well. So external oblique and internal oblique refer to its proximity to being deep or superficial. So external is further out, internal is further in, and transverse is the deepest of them. And so layer by layer, if you look at this, you have rectus abdominis up front in the middle with the linea alba, and then external oblique is most superficial. Deep to that is internal oblique, and deep to that is transverse. Fiber-wise, when you look at this and how they integrate in, okay, so rectus abdominis allows for, when you think crunches, and that six-pack look is nothing more than a tendinous-like sheath that goes across the muscle itself that causes that look. It's not like you have 6 different muscles in there. That linea alba sometimes will be torn, and you'll have individuals who come in with a diastasis recti where it's like a bulging because that material, that tendinous material gives up. So here's the thing. With external oblique, notice the sawtooth type look. It looks a lot like serratus anterior, which comes the other direction, and almost like fits dovetail into here. So if you think of external oblique and serratus anterior, that'll help you kind of orient when you choose correctly which muscle am I. You know external oblique looks a lot like serratus, whereas internal oblique doesn't have that sawtooth or serratus type look to it. See that? And the fibrin runs different. Go back up. You can see the fibrin here kind of runs up and back, whereas internal runs a little different angle down to the iliac crest, right? Now, if we go ahead and look at this in terms of that zipper along the front of the body, that linea alba sometimes will get torn, or we'll have people have a slight dysfunction, they'll have a slight adjustment where it's no longer straight, it has a bow to it. But a diastasis recti will be where if this is actually torn and part of the musculature underneath it pops out and is herniated through that. With sternocleidomastoid, we talked a little bit about him, how this muscle group is one that usually needs to have some soft tissue work done when you work with clients. For cervical extension, the group of these muscles all together in the rector spinae, notice how it might be extension, but it's not as though it runs straight north-south up the spine. You actually have different levels to level to level, and these actually protrude outward when you look at thoracic. Same thing, cervical lateral flexion. You can look at these muscles. Okay, good. You can look at the agonist for cervical rotation, much the same. For lumbar flexion, rectus abdominis, you should know the difference between external and internal, right? One has a serratus-like edge, the other doesn't. And then you have quadratus laborum, which when he comes to the party with psoas and iliopsoas, and there's dysfunction there, you have some problems with your coffee mugs up front and your chew toy, in between your coffee mugs, that being the vertebral disc. External oblique and internal oblique. If you want to think of it this way, these run at an off angle. They're serratus with serratus anterior. This internal oblique runs almost straight north-south like an eye, if you want to think internal. Okay, so you got that? Internal looks like an eye. External has that serratus type look to it. Or if you want to think X, like it has an angle to it. Let's go a step further here. You have, again, lumbar rotation. Those guys are both used in that movement. And that's it. Hope you guys have a good one. And be on the lookout for a homework assignment and then a final exam sooner than later. Be well. Bye.